You're listening to the Get Over It podcast. I am your host, Art of the Rhyme. Here at Get Over It Media, we are a pro-truth podcast. So while we do not always keep it black, we do always keep it 100. Recently, I saw a video on TikTok, and it had to do with a man standing in front of his home and putting supplies into the back of a van. The man happened to be black, and so shortly thereafter, a police vehicle pulls up, and the officer happens to be white. The officer gets out of the vehicle and begins to question the man. We don't have audio, so we don't know what the exact dialogue was. But in the course of the dialogue, the officer asked the man to turn around and place his hands behind his back. The man does so. He's then escorted over to the vehicle while the officer is continuing to gather information. Now, the commentary provided by the TikToker is that the man was a doctor and he was filling his van with supplies so that he could go administer COVID tests to either, I don't remember if it was the homeless or the elderly or something like that. And he did not have his ID on him. So while complying, the man again turned around, put his hands behind his back, and followed instructions. However, he called up to his wife to have his wife bring his ID down. Okay, so after a while, after everything gets sorted out, the officer then releases him. So I made the comment that the man was in total compliance and he did not get shot, which is the objective. And I said the man can now file a complaint if it's warranted and or sue, again, if it's warranted, as opposed to having his widow do it on his behalf. And what was interesting was the pushback that I got in the comment section. And it was from a black man, an older black man whose profile says that he was a grandfather. And he responded by saying that, ask Philando Castillo. Oh, wait. You can't because he's dead. For those who are not familiar with Philando Castillo, he was in his vehicle. He was stopped. He told the officer that he had a gun. And again, I'm not familiar with the particulars, but the officer is then saying, don't reach for it. And the officer believed that Castillo was reaching for it. And I believe, you can look it up and get the particulars. So out of that exchange comes two takeaways that I want to share here on this podcast. So first, let's talk about what I call the Floyd effect, the George Floyd effect. As we all know, George Floyd was killed or ritualistically removed. If you know, you know. And that heinous scene was played in a loop, not just across the nation, but across the world. Why? Because there was something they wanted us to see and then react to. I talk about this in a podcast at length when I discuss the Floyd verdict and what I expect to come out of that. Um, Here's when we knew without question that it was a psyop. First of all, when you watched it, you could see that it was a psyop. And the fact that they played it in a loop like that, whenever you see something of that nature, especially a black man being killed by a white officer, and it becomes nationwide news, global news, yeah, it's a psyop. And it just so happened to be captured on film. Wow, imagine that. But here's when all doubt was removed. When they introduced Floyd's criminal past into the equation. And again, I go over this in depth in that other podcast. But when they did that, you could tell that they were creating a Hegelian dialectic dynamic. Here's what I mean. You were on the one side, you were going to have people saying, well, he was a criminal. He deserved what he got. The officers were justified in stopping him. And then by doing that, the impact is that they diminish the heinousness of it. But more importantly, what it does is it feeds into the stereotype of thuggery with black people. And so over time, it builds up a callousness to what you're seeing so that change can't be made from a power dynamic. Now, on the other hand, what it creates is a pressure coming from the other side. Well, what ends up happening is you morph from condemning what happened to him to now defending him. And you see the end result was that Floyd over time became Big George, Lovable George, the gentle giant. Listen, by most accounts, Floyd was a degenerate. That doesn't justify what happened to him. But he was elevated to sainthood. Sent the brother on a national tour as far as funeral goes, coming to a city near you. He was placed in the pantheon of Greek heroes. And he's now being honored in much the same way that MLK was. I believe Pelosi thanked him for sacrificing his life. That's how they're honoring. And that, again, is intentional. I talk about that at length in the podcast where we do the verdict. But let me say this. How's that intentional? Because they want blacks. They don't want the cause to be noble. So in other words, if someone is clearly killed in a heinous way, can't remember the guy who got shot when the police executed him and then planted a gun. It was all see. That's the type of stuff that we should be marching against. That's the type we should see, and that would be noble. But they don't want the cause to be noble. They want blacks out there marching and defending wrong criminal behavior because it has a cascading effect. And again, we talk about that at length in the other podcast. Listen, we celebrated or we're honoring Jacob Blake, another degenerate. The New Orleans Saints had his name on their helmet. That's a problem. We're honoring criminal behavior, justifying it, and defending it, and marching it. And again, the problem is we have to be careful what we celebrate, what we honor, and what we defend. Because it begins to break you down morally. You lose the ability to tell right from wrong. And that's where we're headed. And again, all of that is intentional. So back to the original TikTok. There are those who would rather have seen that man get shot because it fits their paradigm. They can then say, see how they're killing us, even when we comply. Listen, when we start fully complying, if they start killing us then, that's when we burn this son of a bitch down. But again, had that man been shot, they never would have shown it. They would have suppressed it. Why? Because they don't want something that clear cut, something that unambiguous to be broadcast, because then it gives the cause nobility. It justifies it. So, last takeaway. The fact that the man who was going back and forth with me until I just shut him down is a grandfather. I'm thinking, you're too old to be that damn stupid. The comments coming out of your mouth lack any semblance of wisdom. It's a problem for our community. I can expect some child saying something like that, because that's what a child would say. And then you correct the child. But here's a man who's supposed to be one of the elders of the community, taking his cue from the youth. And that's a major problem in the black community. Too emotional, too immature. The voices are far too feminine, even coming out of the men, and that needs to stop. We'll talk more about this later, and I'll give some remedies and some solutions. But for now, and that's what's up. Thank you for listening. This is the Get Over Immediate podcast. Don't forget to hit thumbs up and subscribe. And if you're so inclined, you want to support the channel, hit that Cash App or visit our store. And with that, we're out. Peace. Buckle up, Betty Lou. It's going to be a bumpy ride.